Steve Hayes right now, senior writer, Weekly Standard, Fox News contributor out of Washington. And Steve, good evening to you, and thank you for your time tonight. Let's pick your brain a couple things based on what we know right now, okay? Here is Kansas. We checked it for Cruz, 48 to 23%. That's a big win for Cruz when you think that he was in that state 3 times this past week, and Trump went there earlier today. In Maine at the moment, Steve, this is what we can tell viewers at home. This is what we have, a 12% of the vote. Cruz has about a 7-point advantage over Trump as well. Go ahead and analyze based on what you're seeing from those 2 states first, Steve.
Sure. Well, Kansas first. Obviously, Donald Trump wanted to win in Kansas. It's why he spent more time there. It's the reason that they cited for skipping CPAC, although certainly I think there were other reasons involved there. And Marco Rubio thought that he had an opportunity to do well in Kansas. The margin of victory for Ted Cruz in Kansas is stunning. I mean, it really is. It's a big win in Kansas. It's true that Rick Santorum won there in 2012. It's true that it's a hospitable state for Ted Cruz, but it's a big win. That is significant. On Maine, what's significant about those results, if those results in fact hold, is that this is a different kind of voter for Ted Cruz. You know, we talk about Ted Cruz and his obvious strength with evangelical voters and very conservative voters. He's done well with them throughout these early contests. He sometimes is losing them to Donald Trump, but when he wins, it's because he builds a big margin with those 2 voting categories. There aren't many of those voters in Maine, and for Ted Cruz to have done well there suggests that he's reaching beyond the constituency that's carried him to the success that he's had thus far, and it'll be interesting to see if that's something that we see from Ted Cruz going forward, or if this is more a function of the tremendous organization that he has and their ability to organize in caucus states.
Keep in mind the border states with New Hampshire was overwhelmingly for Trump, and so too was Massachusetts. Yep. Here is Kentucky right now. Too early to say, Steve. 12%. Trump has an 8-9 point lead right now in Kentucky. I want to show you something, Steve. I want to game out sort of the shadow boxing from Santorum and Romney 4 years ago with what we're kind of seeing right now with Cruz and Trump so far this year. Let's start in Kansas, okay? And go back to 2012. Santorum easily beat Mitt Romney. And again, it's not apples to apples, just so everybody understands. The schedule is different every 4 years, frankly. But Santorum was a winner in Kansas. He was also a winner in Oklahoma. He was also an easy winner in the state of Missouri. Down here in the Southeast, he was a winner in Tennessee. He was also a winner over Romney in the state of Alabama. And he was also a winner in Louisiana, won every parish in Louisiana 4 years ago. And we're starting to see this comparison now with Cruz picking off a state here or there, and we'll see if that continues. The other thing I want to recall from 4 years ago in the state of Ohio, this was a 1-point margin between Romney and Santorum as we get further down the road. You know, March 15th, Ohio will come into play. But just reflect on that right now, where Cruz just kind of nips at the heels and nips at the heel with every one of these states here, Steve.
Yeah, and racking up delegates even in the places where he's lost, which was a point that he made during his press gaggle in Iowa a little bit earlier. Look, I think in some respects this election certainly is an odd election. I mean, there are so many unprecedented things that have happened thus far. I think we're likely to see more. But if you look back at 2012, for all of the talk about establishment versus anti-establishment, you could make an argument that in 2012 you had that dynamic at play even more, or at least that the lines were more distinct. I mean, Mitt Romney very clearly was the establishment candidate in 2012. He's a former governor of Massachusetts. He was a moderate, and he ran as an establishment candidate. He made very few efforts to bring in the Tea Party to reach out beyond his constituency of somewhat conservatives and traditional Republican voters that he thought would get him the nomination. Rick Santorum, by contrast, was a very conservative voter. He won candidate. He won very conservative candidates and voters and also evangelicals, and the lines were distinct. Here I think you have, despite all of the talk about establishment versus anti-establishment, there's so much blurring of those lines. I mean, you've got Marco Rubio, who some people are putting in the establishment camp who was a Tea Party candidate, and Cruz, who's clearly anti-establishment but has come from Washington, and Donald Trump, who's anti-establishment but is winning votes of moderates and somewhat conservatives, and John Kasich, who is, I think, probably the closest thing to an actual establishment candidate. So there's this hodgepodge, and I think reporters have been lumping people into these categories in a way that doesn't necessarily fit the way that their profiles are.
I think that's a fair distinction. Just like the schedule is not apples to apples, neither are the campaigns,
right,
too.
Exactly. It's a good point.
And, Steve, so hang on there in Washington. Again, Trump on top of Cruz in Kentucky. Rubio is not having a good night in these first three contests, and we're going to reflect on that as we go throughout the evening as well. Thank you, Steve.